Good evening. My name is Tom Farrell. This is Sarah Reel and Patrick Huber. This week we have Mr. Kyle Thompson, who has kindly agreed to come talk to us about the dilemma of the manager versus the entrepreneur. Kyle Thompson is an active investor involved in a number of energy-related enterprises. He is currently active in the following ventures: investor, partner and director of Dale Gas Partners, and investor and director of Armstrong Tool Company. Kyle is a 1981 graduate of Oklahoma State University with a BS in accounting. After graduating, he spent 5 years as a CPA with both Ernst & Young and Deloitte too. He joined Victoria Gas Corporation in 1985 as Chief Financial Officer and served as President and CEO until his departure in May 2006. Kyle is an active member of the Dallas Petroleum Club, where he chaired a number of committees and served as president in 2003. He also serves on the TCU Energy Institute Board of Advisors. Kyle is actively involved in his community, currently serving on the board of the Highland Park Independent School District Education Foundation. In addition, he spends time as an elder of Watermark Community Church in Dallas and spends considerable time in Eastern Africa, training community, tribal, and church leaders in leadership and conflict resolution. Kyle and his wife Lucina, also a 1981 graduate of OSU, have 2 children: Jordan, a graduate of TCU, and Audrey, a senior at Texas A&M, majoring in petroleum engineering. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Kyle Thompson.
That was a great intro, Pat. Thank you very much. I think it really sets us up well for tonight. I do want to, as Tom mentioned, my wife is here with us. She's in the back. To tell you a little bit more about her, she graduated with a degree in marketing and then went to work for Bank of Oklahoma back when Bank of BOK was a little bank in Tulsa. And then when we moved to Dallas, went to work for a consulting company, and her main client was Royal Bank of Canada. And so her job back then was really helping the bankers learn how to be more entrepreneurial in what they were doing. And so a lot of my equipping came from my wife. And so it's fun, always fun to have her come up. We love being up here in Stillwater. Just to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that Tom mentioned, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on what is really the most critical part, whether you are a manager, entrepreneur, regardless of what you're doing, they all have to operate from the same foundation. And if you don't, then you are going to have great difficulty operating regardless of what you do. And so I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about that, and then we'll jump into the Q&A and really look forward to chewing a little bit more on what was talked about. I think for me, when I got out of school, being in public accounting, again, that's a technical skill. But the thing that really helped me those first 4 or 5 years of experience was just getting exposed to a number of different companies as an auditor and getting to see the impact of leverage, how different companies operated from a different financial platform. When we got out of school in 1981, it's interesting, unemployment was 9.7%, so it's not a whole lot different than what you all have. As a matter of fact, it's better for you than it was for us. But interestingly, inflation was 12%. Whereas right now they claim it's less than 2%. And if you wanted to buy a house, 30-year mortgage rates were 15%. And so as you can imagine, we didn't borrow a lot of money when we got out of school. Again, the opposite situation you all have. So just the whole concept of leverage and how that impacts companies was very relevant for us. And so it really helped equip me in understanding risk and the impact of risk. Not long after that, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Penn Square Bank and just some of the carnage. That all happened on our watch. They were one of our clients at Arthur Young. And so getting to see the meltdown that resulted from leverage, those were great life lessons. From there, as mentioned, we went to Dallas and went into the oil and gas business. I had worked in the oil fields as a kid and had a lot of oil and gas clients. And from the auditing standpoint, and so I went to work for a very entrepreneurial organization. We were involved in higher risk exploration using no debt, but also Got involved in 1991. The natural gas contract came out on the NYMEX, and I know you all have the little trading deal here, and so we got active in hedging and trading. I had a little bit of exposure to commodities when I was in public accounting, and so we got active because we had a midstream company, a natural gas pipeline company, and we had to figure out how we were going to hedge our risk. Then it was natural to get involved in the NYMEX. And so for me, you know, as an accountant by training, I got the opportunity to start to hone and learn a little bit more about just the creativity, the foresight, some of the things that were critical from an entrepreneurial standpoint and working for a man that was of that realm. We also bought a couple of banks out of bankruptcy, and I got to be on the board of those banks, and again, just seeing turnaround situations and how difficult it is, you know, to take a company that's failed and not only financially resurrect it, but also with a culture. And so my partner and the guy I worked for that eventually became my partner was 30 years older than me, and so in '06, about 5 years ago, we went ahead and monetized the company. I was doing a number of different things at that time, in the oil and gas business and in venture capital, and so I went to do that full time. One of the things was a venture capital company that basically was funding startups. And some of the ones that you've probably heard of or would know something about, one of the startups that we had actually was the company that was set up to do concessions in Cowboy Stadium, the new Cowboy Stadium, and the New York Yankees' new stadium. And when that deal was structured, Jerry Jones was a third partner, the Steinbrenner family was a third partner, and then our group was the other third partner. And so it was really interesting because you had two men that were very entrepreneurial, and then you had us in there really putting up the capital to try and make it go. And the guy that we put in place was the guy who had been the CEO of Pizza Hut, who had retired, who was very much he had come from more of a managerial background. But anyway, so it's just been interesting to get to see all of those different venues and ventures. Some of them have done well and some of them haven't. Jamba Juice was one of our entities, and we were fortunate enough to sell Jamba Juice before that thing started rolling over. We have another one we're involved in called Red Mango. Anybody ever heard of Red Mango? Well, that's why it's not doing well, okay? So anyway, it's really been interesting, just as an aside, recognizing oil and gas is my primary business. So what I'm going to walk through real quick, you know, I've been, as I said, in the role as a manager, as an entrepreneur, and ethics and integrity permeate everything you do, okay? And so if you don't get that right, if you miss on the ethics and the integrity as a foundation, then you will fail. It's just not going to go well for you. And I don't care what you're doing. Doesn't matter what type of role you are. It doesn't matter what kind of capital base you have. Doesn't matter who's backing you. Doesn't matter who's on your team. It will not go well for you. It's just a matter of time. Our son, as we mentioned, graduated from TCU. He moved to California and does not have a job. He was a film major, and so he's on his journey. But the great thing is Jordan has a great foundation from which he is operating from. He has a great basis to make decisions, and so he will have a good journey. He just doesn't know what that's going to be, and so he's navigating that right now. One of the things that, one of the quotes I love by Warren Buffett, and he said this when he was speaking at Harvard Business School a number of years ago, and he said, when I look to hire people, they need to have three things. They need to have intelligence, work ethic, and strong character. And without the last one, the first two will destroy your company. Okay, so what Buffett is saying is that it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how hard you work, if you don't have character, then things will not go well for you and your company. And we've seen this in a number of different avenues, you know, just even recently. How many of you know who Bernie Madoff is? You guys heard of Bernie Madoff? Okay. The guy's really bright, very smart, had excellent work ethic, but character brought the whole empire down and took a lot of people down the drain with him. You guys may be familiar with Enron. Enron, when I got out of school, when I was in Dallas, you know, those guys were the smartest guys in the room. We did a lot of business with Enron. We operated in South Texas. They were innovators. They were entrepreneurs. The trading platforms that they came up with for natural gas and then for power generation, and you know, it was just incredible the things that were coming out of that headquarters. And but obviously the things that Jeff Skilling and Andy Fastow had a weakness in their character, okay? And so the greed got them, and that ended up taking the whole thing down, and a number of companies with it. We had exposure to Enron. Everybody I knew did some level of business, whether selling natural gas or being involved in exploration with Enron. And so I'm going to just click off 4 or 5 things related to the whole character arena, tell you a few stories, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. First of all is just authenticity. And I just say, you know, be who you are. Don't try to impress people. One of the greatest assets you have are your upbringing, your makeup, your life experiences. Malcolm Forbes, one of his quotes is, "Too many people overvalue what they are not and undervalue who they are." For me, I grew up in little towns. My dad was my parents married when they were 18 years old, so I was born while my dad was in college. And so you can imagine, you know, my parents just trying to make a living when he got out of school. So we moved about every 2 years, and I lived in a bunch of little towns, Gainesville, Wichita Falls, Abilene, Pampa, Texas, and then moved to the big city, Oklahoma City, you know, which was the massive metropolis for us. And so anyway, I look back, I had a bunch of jobs. I was always working, whether it was junior high, high school. When I was here in Stillwater, worked making t-shirts at Stillwater Shirt Works. It's not there anymore. But I was always doing something. And so as I look back, a lot of the work ethic, a lot of the skills, understanding relationships, understanding, being in a retail environment, customer service, all those things really were some of the best experiences I had when I got out of school. Not that I didn't learn great things, and the organizations I was involved in here at OSU. And so, don't undervalue, regardless of what your upbringing is. Those are assets. When I went to work in Dallas, a guy that called me, I did not know him. He had this independent oil and gas company. He said, "Hey, I was playing golf with a friend of mine and was telling him I wanted to bring a CFO in, and I wanted somebody young. I wanted someone that was creative, that was effective, and that had great work ethic. You know anybody to call?" And he said, "Well, there was this kid that worked for me one summer, roustabouting, and cleaning tank batteries and pulling weeds and digging ditches. And I was always amazed, at how hard he worked, how he carried himself, his character, and I've kept up with him. I know he got an accounting degree, and I know he's in public accounting. It's probably worth giving him a call." Okay, and so that's how I got the job that took me to Dallas. And so again, just don't undervalue who you are. The second is just being open and honest in everything you say and do. And there is such a tendency, pressure to be somebody sometimes we're not, or just not to be honest because you think, oh gosh, if I tell the truth, if I don't exaggerate, or I want to make sure, I want to put it forth as good of an impression as I can. See also, if you guys know who Des Bryant is. Anybody know who Desmond Bryant is? You guys remember what happened to Desmond Bryant a couple of years ago? Did you have dinner at Deion Sanders' house? No, I didn't have dinner there. Okay, it didn't matter that he had dinner at Deion Sanders' house. There was no NCAA violation in doing that. Deion Sanders was trying to invest in young guys like Des Bryant and be a positive influence, exercising leadership. He's in a position to influence. And so Desmond wasn't sure if that was something wrong or not, so he lied. And that's what put him on probation. It wasn't what he did, it was the fact that he lied to the NCAA. And so, we all sometimes have, I call it my Des Bryant moment. And, I had one about 8 years ago. I've got an accounting background, and so I had a little bit of an insecurity being in the oil and gas business and the fact that I was not a petroleum engineer or a geologist. So I was in a position of evaluating oil and gas deals. I learned geophysics from a layman's standpoint in engineering, but I didn't have the technical training. And so we had a guy in there showing us a deal that was in East Texas, and he was walking through it. He said, "Hey, do you know what a new light shoal is? And this is a buried new light shoal." And he saw me kind of looking glaringly, and he said, "You know what a new light shoal is, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." Okay, I had no idea what a new light shoal was. And so he proceeded to go through this prospect, and it just started to eat me up. I thought, why did I lie? This guy's selling us a deal. You know, I had a hard time hearing anything else he said. And so after that meeting, I had gone to lunch with a couple of good friends of mine, and I just said, "Hey, you won't believe what just happened." And I told them, just as guys that were good friends and that were helping me, and they said, "Well, you know what you need to do, don't you?" And I thought, "Oh my goodness." And they said, "You need to call that guy and just tell him you lied." And I thought, "I'm not going to call that guy." They said, you got to call him, you know. "You told us, and we're going to help you." And so I went back to my office, and I had that guy's card, and I called him, and I just said, "Hey," told him who I was. And, you know, the guy gets on the phone, and all of a sudden he's real excited because he's like, "They're going to take my deal." You know, I must have done well. And I said, "You know, you asked me what a new light show was during our meeting, and I told you I did, and I lied to you. I didn't know what it was, and I need to ask for your forgiveness for lying to you." And you talk about awkward conversation. And so the guy starts explaining on the phone what a new light show. I said, "No, I know what it is now because I went and looked it up." And so he said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, that's the only reason I was calling you is just, would you forgive me? I lied to you. And so I want to be a guy who says what he means and is honest." And so I was not that man when you and I were together. And so anyway, that has stuck with me, just like I guarantee it, next time somebody asks Des Bryant a question, he's going to err on the side of honesty. Okay? Because the consequences are painful. Mine weren't nearly as painful as his, you know. But again, those are opportunities we have to either grow from them or not. Next, just integrity. I always say your actions speak so loud, no one can hear what you say. Okay, your actions speak so loud, nobody can hear what you say because they're watching what you do. One of the things that was a significant project for us is we got involved in the Barnett Shale. If you guys have ever heard of the Barnett Shale, it's the shale that really started all the shale plays in oil and gas. It's under Fort Worth, Tarrant County, that whole area. In 2007, Chesapeake got real active in the Barnett Shale, and we were one of the first ones in the play. And they started running the price up, and so we got to a point that we could not afford to continue to operate. And so Chesapeake came to us and wanted to buy all of our acreage and our wells, and so we made a deal to sell to Chesapeake. And we started into you know, we're just small guys, so we started into an agreement with Chesapeake, and about 45 days into the agreement, prices in the Barnett Shale went from $15,000 an acre, which is what we were selling for, to $30,000 an acre. And so for our partnership group, the guys that I was involved with, that was millions of dollars. And so you just multiply it by 2. And we did not have an agreement with Chesapeake. We had a verbal agreement with Chesapeake. We didn't have a written agreement with them. And so we had a meeting one day and just said, "Hey, you know, the letter of intent has expired. We're still trying to negotiate this purchase and sale agreement, and prices have doubled. What do we do?" And we just looked at each other and just said, "Hey, you know, we had a deal with Chesapeake." And so the fact that we have a trapdoor out, the fact that prices have doubled are really not relevant. Okay? It doesn't matter if they've quadrupled. If you're going to if there's a price on your word, then let's just decide what that is. And so we felt like we had made a commitment to them. And so we ended up closing that transaction without an agreement because Chesapeake recognized also what had happened, and we just said, let's go ahead and close it, and there's going to be all kinds of things that we can't document in an agreement. This is who we are, we know who you guys are, and we'll work it out as things come up. There are going to be so many situations we can't put in the agreement. What ended up happening after that is we now have had 4 different ventures with Chesapeake. We opened an office in in Shreveport, Louisiana for the Haynesville. We opened an office in Pittsburgh with Chesapeake for the Marcellus, and then we continue to have a joint venture with them in Fort Worth. They said, well, we want to be partners with you in addition to buying from you. So again, just integrity, consistency in what you claim and who you claim to be. Next is just valuing people and relationships. Again, I love seeing that on there. Just again, life is about people, and that's true in business. It's about developing relationships. I've been to 2 funerals in the last 60 to 90 days of very successful businessmen. And in both of those funerals, they didn't talk about their business accomplishments. They talked about how they valued people, the impact that they had on specific people that they did business with. And so, to me, that's always a great tale and a great reminder to just get grounded again on what is most important in life, and that's people. One of the funerals I went to was actually a funeral for my dad. My dad had drowned in a lake accident at Lake Texoma about 2.5 months ago, and so Lucinda and I were out of the country, and we flew back in. And when we landed, who was there but my partner and his wife? And it was really a great reminder to me, again, of just the first folks that were there were people that I did business with. And so, again, just never losing sight of the fact that no matter what role you have as an entrepreneur or a manager, it's all about valuing people and relationships. Empathizing and seeing things from others' point of view. That's just a life skill that you got to develop. And you get opportunities to do that here in school as you have conflict with people. One of the constants that you will have in life is conflict. And so how you navigate conflict, being able to listen, being able to hear, being able to empathize and see things from other people's points of view is just critical. And then treating those who can do nothing for you well. Again, it's valuing people. I love the story of the professor that was having a final, and all the students came into the room, and he said, okay, there's going to be one question. And the question is, tell me the name and something about one of the people that clean the room every week when you guys leave. And so that's how they got graded on it. What he was saying is, hey, you've learned a lot of good stuff. Have you learned the importance to value the people that are coming behind you and serving you? And so again, just treating those who you might perceive can do nothing for you well. And then elevating communication, learning to ask good questions, open questions. This is one of the things I've learned really well from my wife. What do you need? How can I help? What do you think? Help me understand. Those types of questions, whether you're a manager, whether you're an entrepreneur, doesn't matter where you are, learning to ask good open questions. And then listen, speaking truth. Again, being honest in every environment. You're going to have opportunities to help people. And I rely on folks helping me, people that I work with, people that are around me, whether they work for me, whether they're a partner of mine. I had a situation not that long ago where a gentleman that I serve on a board with who is highly esteemed in our city, and as a business guy, very intelligent, very bright, had a really bad habit, and we would be in board meetings, and inevitably he would start dropping F-bombs. And it was a bad habit that he had developed. And this guy's now in his early 50s, and again, he is one of the guys that helped start or who bought the Texas Rangers and put George Bush in the position that he had as general manager. So he was very well known in Dallas. And so, and I would hear people talk about him after the meeting and just say things about him, because typically in a business environment, when someone uses language like that, it communicates a sloppiness, it communicates a lack of care for the other folks in there, and just an inability to articulate well a point that they're trying to make. And so one of the guys that was on that board with me came in my office and just said, hey, I just can't believe that he continues to do that. And I said, well, I know. Have you ever talked, this was a guy who was a friend of his, and I said, have you ever said anything to him about that? And just to let him know that that's really hurting him in his communication. And they said, you got to be kidding. I would never go and approach him and say something to him about that. What would he think? And I said, well, I'm just challenging you. And so I said, I tell you what, if you'll go with me, let's go and talk to him. And he said, you can talk to him all you want, but don't count me in. I'm not going. And so actually, Lucina and I talked a lot about this. And I said, okay, I'm in a position to help him. And so I got to decide, am I willing to move forward or not? And so what I ended up doing is I called him and I said, hey, I would love to have lunch with you and just visit with you a little bit. And so we set up a lunch, and what we did is when we sat down, I said, hey, and I'm going to tell you his first name. I said, Marshall, I said, you know, I don't get to work around many folks like you that are as intelligent, have the kind of experience. And I said, I've learned a lot about you, but what I really appreciate about you is, you ask about my kids, you know about my wife, and you're interested in me, and I consider you a friend. And he said, well, I really consider you a friend too, Kyle. I've really enjoyed being on different boards with you. And I said, well, if there was something I was doing that you saw was hurting me, would you tell me? And he said, of course I'd tell you. He said, I'd tell you in a heartbeat. He said, but I've never seen you do anything that would discourage folks. And I said, well, Marshall, I need to ask for your forgiveness. And he said, well, what? And I said, well, there's something that I've seen that has hurt you, and I've taken months to come and say something to you. And I said, has anyone ever said anything to you about your language, specifically the fact that you have a tendency when you get animated and to start dropping F-bombs? And he said, when have I ever dropped an F-bomb? I said, Marshall, you do it all the time. He said, you're kidding. I said, has anyone ever said anything to you about it? Never. No one's ever mentioned that. And it's interesting because our relationship since then has never been the same. Just the depth of relationship. And so his appreciation for me coming to him, and it's funny because now I'll be in meetings with him, and he's so careful about what he says. A couple of times he slipped and he recognized it. And so anyway, to me it's just been a great reminder, just speaking truth, you know. And he may not have reacted like that, he may have reacted differently, but it shouldn't matter, you know, in terms of what's the right thing for me to do. Taking responsibility is another one of my pet peeves, just stepping up and taking responsibility. Don't worry about the consequences. If it's the right thing to do, then you need to do it. I had, about 6 months ago, we had a COO in one of these companies that got sloppy in his communication and had done some things with a young woman via email and through texting that were just inappropriate. And the way we found out about it is we got a lawsuit filed against us. And so we started, when this happened, we started trying to find out what in the world had gone on. And so we pool all these emails and we see what's happened. And so we sit down with our lawyers, and we have a number of women that work for us, and they just said, hey, you guys need to be aware that this could quickly blow up into a class action situation, because if he did it to her, there's probably other situations, and so you need to absolve yourself of responsibility. We need to make sure that he individually takes, you know, responsibility for it. You need to make sure you don't admit fault on anything. And they go through telling us all the things that we're not supposed to do. And so I looked at my partner and I just said, look, you know, we put Mike in this position as COO, and we also didn't surround him with people that were helping him, obviously, with some of the decisions he was making. And so, you know, we're the owners of this company. And so to say that we're not responsible is just a joke. And so we got to decide whether we're going to do the right thing or whether we're going to play the game of limiting our legal liability. Because if the right thing to do means that we're going to assume liability, then that's what we got to do. And so what we ended up doing, once we saw it happen, is we immediately fired him, and then we spent time with him trying to help him, you know, just working through understanding how we got to that point. And then we got all of our employees together, and we just said, look, here's what's happened, and here's what we've done. But we want to make sure that you know that we've always said this is our mission statement, this is who we want to be, this is how we want to value employees. And We didn't do that here because we had someone that was in a high level of responsibility that was not consistent with that. And so that's our fault. And so we want to ask you all for forgiveness for this happening on our watch, and let you know the things that we're going to do to make sure this does not happen again. And by the way, you all know a lot better than we do what other things we might need to put in place. Is this going on with anybody else? Does anyone else feel like they're being intimidated in any realm? Because if there is, we want to correct it. And so anyway, what ended up happening was the woman that this happened to immediately dropped the lawsuit, which was a shock to our attorneys because they just expected once we admitted fault that this thing was going to blow up. And we had a couple other people come to us and make us aware of situations that we needed to be aware of. So again, just learning to take responsibility. And lastly, it's just always learning. I use a term, and you guys probably use this in your classes, of just skating to where the puck's going to be. Have you all heard that before? You know, you don't want to skate to, if you skate to where the puck is, then the puck's already moved. And so you've always got to be skating to where the puck's going to be. This is not a hockey town. Dallas is not a big hockey town, but visually I understand, I get what that means. And so you've always got to be learning. You've got to be looking where business is going, not where it is right now, because the opportunities probably aren't where things are right now. The opportunities are where things are going, and to do that, you've got to be learning. You've got to be understanding your industry. You've got to be learning what other folks are doing, and you're going to fail. And I always say, you know, failure does not mean game over. It means learn and try again. And one of the things that we've tried to do, before we had the Barnett Shale project, there were probably 10 projects that ended up being disasters for us. They just didn't work out. And so I always say, you want to make sure you get your money's worth. You know, if you fail, if you have something that didn't work out, you spent money on it, get your money's worth. Learn from it, and then move on from there. And so I just wanted to touch on some of those things, and then I'd love to jump into anything else that we want to talk about, getting into the Q&A with entrepreneurs and managers.
Great. Well, let's move on.
I'll stand as Greg.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start. I have one question that sort of comes to mind is, so would you make the distinction that there really is a manager versus the entrepreneur, or would you say they're the manager and the entrepreneur? Is there a real difference?
I would say that there are definitely positional differences. You know, there is someone that is in a position that has specific responsibilities to, just like, again, I was a CPA. Okay, so I came into a company as a CFO. You would view that as a managerial position. I'm responsible for managing cash flow, for putting out balance sheets, financial statements that are representative of the company. There are also opportunities in a CFO role to be entrepreneurial, you know, because I can see some things that are going on financially, and I might be able to suggest other things that we could do to maximize the resources that we have. Conversely, you know, in an entrepreneurial role, there's someone that is charged with, again, using the analogy I used earlier, skating to where the puck's going, thinking about strategically where is our business headed, where do we think the next opportunities are, you know, what are the things that we need to do to be able to capitalize on those. And so, you know, you've got different positions. And I'll stop there and go to the next one, because I don't want to expound too much on that.
Well, that's okay. When you go to invest in a venture, what are the traits that you look for most in the CEO?
All right, a CEO, you know, number one, they've got to be an optimist, because you get beat down so easy. And I know I'm a natural pessimist, and I've learned to just be more optimistic and creative. Fortunately, I married a woman who's very creative, and so Lucina's really helped me in that regard. But, you know, an entrepreneur has got to have vision. They've got to be able to see opportunities, especially as competitive as every industry is. And so, you know, for a startup, what we look for is you know, what's the idea? You know, what's the concept? Does it make sense? Intellectually, does it make business sense? Is there something here that's investable, you know, in the market that they're going in? The next question we always ask is, who's the team? Okay, who are the people in place that are there that are going to help him execute? Because if you don't have a team in place that's going to basically complete the weaknesses that an entrepreneur has, and again, those are different for everybody, whatever skill set, the way they're wired, then we want to make sure that there's a team in place to help that.
Well, typically we hear that when venture capitalists come in to support a company, the first thing we do is take the entrepreneur out and put a CEO in. So is that always the case?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We got an interesting case study right now with Steve Jobs. And you guys all know who Steve Jobs is. You know the history of Apple, you know, when Steve Jobs started. And we actually had one of the early computers back when it's a, you know, it's a black screen and there's green stuff on there. And so as Apple advanced, you know, Jobs was a great visionary, had great ideas, very, very bright. Then he got to a point, Apple grew to a point where he could not manage the operations and the growth that they were experiencing, and he eventually got fired. You know, and of course, what does he do? He goes and he starts Pixar, you know, another creative business with other partners, and then they end up growing that, selling it to Disney, such that, you know, the majority of his net worth was in Disney stock, not in Apple stock, and then Apple went downhill from there until they brought Steve Jobs back in a role that was really customized for the fact that he was a visionary. So, you know, it takes a lot of, I think, humility for an entrepreneur to recognize what the weaknesses are that he has, see the value he adds, and then, you know, backfill. And it may be that he needs to be an advisory director and not CEO. And so it is very common, you know, as things grow, because you do have, you know, things get extremely complex as they get bigger.
Do you think that the terms manager and entrepreneur are mutually exclusive in terms of traits?
Not at all. I mean, I would, you know, people think of me as an entrepreneur, but again, I've got an accounting degree. I'm a pessimist. You know, you got to put everything in its right slot, in the right box. It's black and white. And so I've learned over the years, being around other people, again, I think one of the things I mentioned earlier is always learning, you know, asking questions. Learning that, hey, you know, there's, we're all limited by our experience and our knowledge and just wanting to learn more. And so as you do that and as you understand how the company operates, then you start to get, you know, one of the things, I'll give you a little story if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
One of the things we did last year, we had this project in Alaska that we got involved in. It was a very unique situation. You think, well, what's a small company like ours doing in Alaska? Most of the oil and gas is on the North Slope, and Anchorage is down, you know, in the southern part of Alaska. And so all of the majors are drilling on the North Slope, and there had been drilling around Anchorage in the Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula for 30 or 40 years. And what's happened is their natural gas usage has continued to decline, and they've gotten in a situation where they're starved for natural gas. So there was another entrepreneurial company, E&P, Exploration Production out of Denver, a guy named Bill Armstrong, that we did some business with, and so we decided to go up. They had a relationship with the government officials in Alaska because they're trying to attract folks to come up and drill because they need natural gas, and their only option was to import it at, you know, $15 a MCF. And as you guys know, natural gas is very inexpensive right now because there's a lot of it. And so we saw an opportunity to go up and take some leases and drill and serve the city of Anchorage. And so what we did, we have a petroleum engineer, we have CFO and other operating people, and we just said, you know what, and we were, as we talked about this, you know, you just talk about all the reasons why that's not a good idea. You know, there's all the environmental hurdles. You've got pristine landscape up there. There had to be a pipeline that had to be built. Natural gas is out of favor. It's not a valued commodity. And so we just felt like, let's just take the whole team up to Anchorage. We'll let them see the project. We'll take them to meetings. And so what happened as we did that, it accomplishes several things. They start to get a vision and understand what we're trying to do. It also recognizes that we're as risk averse, or want to mitigate our risk as they are. And you start to have discussions such that you all get on the same page. And so, one of the things that we highly promote with folks that are in management positions with our company is just always making sure we take the time to let them know exactly what we're doing, let them know why, and then ask them to speak into that and say, hey, we're probably missing some stuff. You guys are wired differently than we are. Help us understand. Again, I went through those open questions. Help us understand if this makes sense or not, and if not, what are we missing? And so as you give people permission to speak into things, then they start to speak into it and start to catch a vision for what you're doing. And so one of our responsibilities with people in managerial positions is give them an entrepreneurial perspective on what we're trying to do. Bring them in so that they're part, because together we're always going to be better. We're going to make better decisions if we have them giving us input. Conversely, we're going to make better decisions as we understand, what are the cash flow implications of this? Okay, we drill these wells. What's a pipeline going to cost? What are the operating costs in Alaska versus, it's a little bit different if you're out in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma or Texas versus in the middle of Alaska. And so having them do a lot of that research and help us. So that's a long-winded answer to your question of just how do you mitigate some of the deficiencies and view those as strengths so that you make better decisions.
So you've told us twice now that you're a pessimist. You started out in a managerial position, but you've been an entrepreneur. So how does that work? Because we've got the manager versus the entrepreneur thing up here. So.
Yeah. Well, again, as you guys described really well, what an entrepreneur is and what a manager is, those are responsibilities and skill sets. And so your lifelong journey is expanding your experience, expanding, part of the reason you are what you are is how you were brought up. Part of it is how God just happened to hardwire you, okay? And so there's ways to grow in who you are. And so I think the beauty of this is that, you always want managers to be more, again, to think about the big picture. Don't live in a dark office with a green visor on. It's a neat world out there. Come and open your eyes and look around. Conversely, I think one of the things that is interesting, and again, there'll be some great books that we get to read about Steve Jobs, but one of the things that he did when he came back into Apple is he said, okay, we're gonna always limit our ideas to 3 things. Okay, an entrepreneur usually has about 50 things, and that was part of the downfall that he had originally at Apple. They were throwing stuff out and trying to do so many different things that they weren't doing anything well. And so when he came back, one of the things he learned from his time at Pixar, at Pixar they said, we're going to do one thing well. Okay, we're going to do it better than anybody else. So when he came to Apple, he said, I'm never going to do more than 3 things. And you got to see that. You saw, iTunes, and then you saw iPhone, and then you saw the, whatever it's called, the iTablet, or what do they call it? iPad. I have one, I should know what it's called. But it's interesting, they don't roll things out too quickly. Because let's just do something and do it really well. And so again, I think there's always opportunity, and you want to be growing. And if you are wired as an entrepreneur, then what you've got to do is figure out how can I equip myself, because I'm naturally an optimist. If I'm that way, I'm naturally probably creative. I'm naturally a visionary. Okay, I've got to work because I want to make sure I understand risk. Downfall of a lot of entrepreneurial companies is they get over leveraged. They get exposed. They don't understand risk. They're operating way ahead of the balance sheet. I had we have a first-hand story that a good friend of ours who had an oil and gas company that operated here in Oklahoma. And, when things got going really well back in '06, he bought 6 drilling rigs. And he borrowed the money to do it. He leveraged it up because he had a lot of activity going on. And then things turned, and all of a sudden, he was not able to keep those rigs busy. He didn't need to buy the drilling rigs. He had a great oil and gas company here. And as he looked back, and he ended up filing bankruptcy. And he was, he owed us money. And when he called me, for me and Lucina, it was just, again, it was an opportunity to care more about him than the money that he owed us, knowing that, his namesake company had gone down. But as he looked back, he didn't have strong people helping him understand the risk he was taking by borrowing the money to buy those drilling rigs. And so he is now operating again at a much different level, but I guarantee you, and he and I have talked a lot, he's now learning, he's got to get equipped in a better understanding of mitigating risk, learning how to read balance sheets. I always tell people that are entrepreneurial, man, if that's the way you are, take accounting classes while you're in school. Take finance classes, because you are going to have to learn to read balance sheets. You've got to understand cash flow, because that's how businesses operate. They don't operate on fumes. They operate with money. If you borrow money, you have to pay that money back, and you have to have a plan to pay that money back. And if you don't, then there's going to be a point in time where the bank comes and says, by the way, that was our money. And so if you don't have the money, we'll just take your company. And you're not wanting them to take your company. And so get equipped in that. It's going to save you a lot of heartache. And so as an entrepreneur, that's what you should be focused on. Again, learning how to be better managers, learning how to understand and read financial statements, learning how to appreciate and affirm the people that work for you. They both have to do that. If you're a manager, again, learn how to be creative. Learn how businesses operate. Learn where things are headed. Read. Get involved in organizations that are going to help expand your borders.
Okay, why don't we open up the floor to some questions from you? I've got a few more, but I'll wait and let you have some things to say. Who'd like to start us off? Yes.
As an entrepreneur, how do you decide when it's time to relinquish control of your company so a professional management team can come in and help it to flourish?
Well, we always, that's a great question, and we always try to hire weaknesses. What are our weaknesses? And let's backfill them. And if the weakness is, the people that are involved, I'm on the recipient side. I went to work for a guy who was an entrepreneur. I came in as CFO, and then, 5 or 10 years into that, he was a petroleum engineer, and he relinquished the CEO president role to me. Okay, and I'm a guy who's 30 years younger than he is. But he said, look, I'm an engineer. This is my skill set. I find oil and gas, and he's really good at it. And you're more equipped and gifted in other areas than I am. And so I've learned, you've got to be someone that's humble. You've got to be someone that recognizes what you have to offer and hire in, the weaknesses, and just recognize as things change. And there's nothing that's static. In this day and age, as you all know, things change very, very rapidly. And you got to recognize when a base assumption that you've made has changed. And I always think of that as, a lot of you guys have played poker before. How many of you have ever played poker? Okay, so if you're playing Texas Hold'em and you get 2 down cards that are kings, you're thinking, I'm sitting in tall cotton, and it's probably not going to be long before I go all in, but I'm going to sucker these guys in. And so the flop comes, and one of them's an ace, and all of a sudden the guy next to you triples the bet. Okay, well, you made an assumption now that may be wrong. Okay, you thought you had the best hand, and now you're thinking, that may be a bad assumption. This guy may have a couple of aces, or he may just have 1 ace. So I may already be down. And so I use that, you guys get to do that all the time when you're playing cards or anything you're doing. You're constantly reevaluating what assumption I've made. Has anything changed? Am I observing Because if I'm not paying attention to what's changing, then I'm probably going to be out. And so, again, just recognizing the dynamics of what's changed and always being open to, if I need to take another position, if I need to turn this over to a group that's more skilled and equipped to run something than I am, then, being willing to do that. Folks that have big egos and struggle with pride, typically, it's not uncommon for them to be taken down. Those things, again, that's a character trait. And it gets back to what I said with Buffett. Those are the things that are probably going to sink you.
Yes.
What are some key character traits that you look for in companies that are going to come be contractors for you or do some consulting for you? I know in Toretta's class you spoke last week and you mentioned that if you're out to lunch with some people, you notice how they treat the people that don't want to give them anything or they can't get anything out of, that can't help them at all. So is there anything else that you look for?
The people piece is big because again, I don't care what you're doing. One of the people that I think has done this really well, and people have very mixed opinions about him, is Aubrey McClendon. But Aubrey is a people person. The folks that they do business with, he knows them. He follows up with them. And so I think, again, I'm not speaking to Aubrey's character, but I am saying he's a guy that definitely cultivates and invests in relationships. And so, again, we're constantly, anytime, that we're doing business with somebody, you're doing business with the people. You're not doing business with the company. And so, again, business hasn't changed, over the hundreds of years. It's the same that it's always been. The ways that we do it is different, but the things that it's founded on, again, the things I talked about that I led with, character, integrity, authenticity, honesty, always learning, valuing people. Those are the things that's the foundation you're operating from. And so we try to get as good a feel of that as we can. And, again, make sure that let your yes be yes and your no be no. Are you going to follow through with what you commit to do? And there's little ways, even in, how you return phone calls, what you say, how you reschedule appointments if something comes up. There's a lot of tells just as you interact with people that kind of tell you where their foundation, what their, I sometimes use the term worldview. Are they someone that makes, typically you make decision based on 3 or 4 things. You make decision based on money. Is this going to make me more money or less money? And so if that's the basis I use, again, then I probably don't want to do business with you, because of that, there's going to be a point in time where there's ways that you might do what you say, might not do what you say you're going to do if you think you can make more money, regardless of what our agreement is. There's people that do things based on feelings, and you have to be careful with that. Again, there's a lot of days that you don't feel like coming to class. You got to decide, am I going to go to class because I feel like it, or am I going to go to class because it's the right thing to do? I'm here to learn. This is what I'm trying to work for, and so I'm going to have to do things that I don't feel like doing. Or, am I going to make decisions based on, again, a foundation? What's my worldview? What do I operate from? And so that's a long answer to your question, just trying to understand and pick up on those things. And is it going to be a good fit? And so we've got examples of where the last one didn't happen, and you end up with a great friendship, but you don't have a business relationship.
I actually have a question to ask, because I've been listening to what you've been saying, and all of these opportunities that you've had where you went to Marshall and tried to share with him that his language probably wasn't the greatest. Where did you develop the courage to do that?
Well, I think that's where. Let's see. How would I answer that? Again, I think part of it is you just got to decide what's the basis that I'm gonna operate off of. And for me, one of the things that really helped me is having friends around me that helped me. because I think one of the difficult things, I think OSU does a great job. I think much better, I'll say this, I think OSU does a better job than Harvard Business School does of getting you a foundation that's going to allow you to be successful in the ways you operate. And I say that from the standpoint of integrity and values, because that's really, again, that's what it all gets back to. And so, you know, for me, I think coming out of school and my experiences here, I learned a great deal about what was going to inform my worldview. I'll tell you this, one of the things that we do in Africa, and I spend, I don't know, I guess in the last 5 years I've been to Africa, 15 or 16 times, equipping leaders over there. And so one of the things I tell them is that we're not there to give you the wisdom of the West, we're there to give you the root of all wisdom. And so for me, I operate off of what you call a biblical worldview. There is great wisdom in the Bible. Sometimes it feels like the right thing to do, sometimes it doesn't feel like the right thing to do, but I've got to decide, do I think that that wisdom is life-giving? And if I am, I'm going to operate based on what it says. And so there's a verse that says, you know, that he who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, it is sin to him. And so I felt like in that situation, I knew the right thing to do. And so am I going to be the man that I represent, that I want to be, or am I not? And so I guess that's where the courage came from. I've got to decide, what wisdom am I going to stand on? And if that's a relative wisdom, that's probably going to get me in trouble. Because if I use my wisdom and decide when I'm going to do that and when I'm not. And what's interesting is as you help people, there are not a lot of people that are willing to, you know, to wound, friends that are willing to wound. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. And so am I going to be a friend that's willing to wound someone? Knowing that they may not want to hear that, but I'm going to be about helping them. And so to me, the more I've done that, the more I have seen that's just wise foundation to operate from. And I've had people, you know, help me in that regard also.
Question, yes.
Do you feel that, like right out of, say for college for us, that like stepping into a manager's position as you did as a CPA or a CFO, and kind of getting to experience the entrepreneurship side slowly versus stepping right out of college and going to, did you see that as more beneficial for you?
Well, it was for me because, again, I got to see, we got out of school in a period of time where a lot of companies were experiencing, you know, great pain and hardship because of leverage, you know, and again, it doesn't take long to take you down at those kind of interest rates. And so, you know, one of the things Lucina and I did early on from watching that is we just said, you know what, we're going to live debt-free. We're going to get out of debt as fast as we can because we've seen the consequences of what happens. The company we operated in the Barnett Shale, I'll just give you the story. The reason that we decided to sell, there's a guy in Dallas who's a friend of ours named Trevor Reese-Jones. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Trevor. He had a company called Chief. He's the one that sold to Devon, and that's how Devon got in the Barnett Shale. And you know, Trevor was borrowing money and leveraging his company up, and it worked out okay for Trevor because he sold. But we had decided as partners that we weren't going to borrow money. And so we were going to operate as long as we could afford to. And so the reason we ended up selling to Chesapeake was because the prices started getting so high, we couldn't continue to operate. And so we came together and we said, hey, you know what, we said we were going to not borrow money, but we've got all these people trying to loan us money. There's an opportunity to leverage this thing up and do what Trevor did. And Trevor's now a billionaire in Dallas. And we just looked at each other and just said, you know what, this is what we said we were going to do. We had the experience of seeing what leverage does, you know, how that cuts both ways. And we said, no, we're going to sell. So let me fast forward 6 months. I told you about going from $15,000 to $30,000, and we kept our deal with Chesapeake and we sold at $15,000. 6 months later, the prices for acreage in the Barnett Shale, or maybe 12 months later, you know, went to $1,500. And so if we had borrowed money and leveraged our deal up and operated, we would have gotten killed. And so I'm thankful, again, that we operated off of a principle that we had decided on. And again, getting to benefit from seeing situations that that other binds that other folks had gotten into, as a result of leverage. So for me, it was better, again, because I wasn't, I didn't have the entrepreneurial skill set either. I didn't have the vision to be able to see opportunities, read, learn, understand that you want to look, recognize that opportunities come from where things are going to be, not where they are right now.
Yes.
Is it possible for management and entrepreneurs to work together, even with different views on character or ethics?
I think it gets back to how you define character and ethics. Okay, and so I would ask you, if you're working with someone and you operate based on the fact that, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and if I commit to do X, Y, Z, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to, so you got a partner that doesn't do those things. It doesn't matter how potentially successful your businesses are going to be. You're going to have a hard time. Again, Bernie Madoff, let's say he's your partner. The guy can make a lot of money. He can raise a lot of capital. Okay? But at some point, in all probability, if he's your partner, then you're going to get taken down with him because of the closeology. Just assume, if you know who he is and he's your partner, that you're a party to whatever he's doing. And so I would think it'd be very difficult.
Yes.
You talked about you kind of moved from a management position and you became an entrepreneur. And you talked about, you didn't have the skill set before to be that entrepreneur and look ahead. So do you think the switch from manager to entrepreneur or vice versa is more of a change in skill set, or do you find it to be more of a natural tendency?
Well, I would say it's definitely not natural, because you are wired a certain way, and your natural inclination is to go that way. And so you've got to work to get out of that box. And you've got to be intentional to do that, because you naturally, are going to continue down a certain road. And so, and again, I think that, I would say every manager should be entrepreneurial in how they execute their job as a manager. And so you say, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm using the terminology you guys used earlier, attributes of an entrepreneur. Risk-taking, creative, being able to, visionary, strategic, just all those. Hopefully you're doing those things. And so but that's a skill set you may have to build. And that may lead to opportunities to do other things that may not. It's interesting because you look at a lot of the CEOs of companies have manager backgrounds. I know the CEO of Jim Mulva with I think it's ConocoPhillips. He's an accountant. A lot of those guys, setting strategy now. That was not their natural inclination. It's a little bit rare sometimes to have an entrepreneur. Again, Jobs is a good example. He's obviously just off the charts creative, but he had to go back and pick up some managerial skills to allow him to come back in and operate in a role that really emphasized and was a good fit with his skill set.
So do you think it's easier for a manager to become an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur to become a manager?
I think it's hard for both of them. I just think for somebody who's wired as an entrepreneur, you just don't naturally think about, you just assume those things are going to work out. The debt stuff and, the widgets are going to get made. And so I don't want to get bogged down in how the widget gets melded and the things get put together and manufactured and come out the other end. I'm just trying to figure out how to sell them. Well, it's probably, I love, you guys know who you guys know who Herman Cain is. You know, he's kind of the up and coming. What's interesting because, you know, Herman Cain was CEO of Godfather's Pizza. And you hear Herman talk about what he did when he became CEO. Godfather's Pizza was, you know, Pillsbury was spinning them off and they were on the brink of bankruptcy. And so he and a group of managers, you know, and Herman was the visionary, they said, you know what, I think we can turn this thing around. And so what he did is he decided, since he's CEO, he promoted himself first to janitor. And he said, I'm gonna be a guy who cleans the toilets, and then I'm gonna self-promote myself once I learn that to be a guy who figures out all the ingredients of what goes into making a Godfather's pizza, and then I'm gonna promote myself to cook, to be able to make the pizzas, and then I'm gonna promote myself to salesman, and then I'm gonna, and so anyway, he started as the CEO, but he said, I'm ill-equipped because I don't know how this business runs. I don't know how to manage it. I don't know what goes into it. I don't know what makes it successful. So if I'm the guy charged with making it successful, then I got to start with, you know, being the janitor and working my way up. So it's really, it's interesting. But again, I think you got to be intentional about how you do that. He didn't have to do that, but he said that's an area that I'm ill-equipped, and so I've got to get equipped by doing that.
Yes.
Through all of the various jobs that you have had, I guess like all of your different jobs are going to have different missions and things of that sort. How do you go about enforcing your beliefs and your missions upon the employees and getting them to follow your path and continue that?
Well, you know, you never force someone to follow you. You know, folks, again, I think, you know, to me, a leader is anyone who is in a position to exercise influence. And so that influence is going to be either good or bad. So I'm going to be a good leader or a bad leader. And so what I need to do is make sure that I'm doing what I'm responsible for doing. And I'll give you an example from Africa. You know, most folks have no idea of what's going on with some of these countries. And there's a country called Burundi. Has anyone ever heard of Burundi? Okay, I'm surprised that many of you know where it's a country just south of Rwanda. Burundi experienced the same tribal genocide that Rwanda did with the Hutus and the Tutsis. There's a gentleman who was an educator, an administrator. Whenever the genocide hit, he was forced from the country. He became a rebel, and once the African Union moved in and they had elections, then this gentleman, I'll mess up his name, but it's Pierre Nkurunziza. And we spent a fair amount of time in Burundi. And so anyway, what he did is he came in and he was very bright. He speaks really excellent English. Burundi speaks French and they speak Kirundi. But he was elected in 2005. We got to meet him in 2006. We were over there and he just said, look, I'm trying to change the direction of my country. And the people have elected me. He was elected by 85% of the population. And he said, would you all be willing to come over and help train leaders in leadership and conflict resolution? It's really teaching the people how to lead by serving the people instead of oppressing the people. He said, I'm trying to do that myself. And so one of the first things that he did is once he was a new president, then I think it was France, gave him as the president this big jet, and so that he could have a presidential plane. And what he did is he just said, look, there's one airport in my country, and it's in the capital, Bujumbura. And so for me to have a jet airplane, the only purpose that jet serves is to get me out of the country. The people elected me to serve the people. And so I don't have any need for a jet. And so he gave it back to him. And so you can imagine how that went over with the people. And he didn't do that because he was trying to get them to follow him. He did it because it was the right thing. He said, how can I lead by serving the people? And so he spends 6 days a week just out with the people. And he was in the U.S., when was it, honey, 2 or 3 weeks ago? He was, you know, they had the big meeting at the UN for all the world leaders, and he came through Dallas on his way back just to thank us and just to interact because we've spent time number of business guys have in Dallas. And I lift him up as a great model of leadership. And he leads by serving the people. And so you can imagine, they just had elections again last year, and I think it was over 90% of the population voted for him. And you say, so how did he get all those people to follow him? He didn't. You know, he just led by serving the people and doing the right thing. And so if that's how you lead, people will follow you. I always say, you know, most of us had dads. And so if I have a dad who loves me, encourages me, affirms me, knows how I'm gifted, and tries to set me up for success, man, I'm going to want to, and models wisdom, I'm going to want to follow that dad. Versus a dad that tells me, I'm the boss, this is what you need to do, you need to follow me because I'm in charge and I'm the leader of the family. Like, how can I get out from under that oppressive leadership? And so, it's always, to me, that's just a great model. So how do I lead? Man, I want to lead by serving the folks that work around me, not reminding them that I've got positional authority over them. Therefore, this is what they need to do because I told them to do it. I don't want to work for somebody like that.
Yes. Yes, in the back, and then Victor, and then Josh. You, yes,
okay.
lady?
All right. Do you think it's possible to teach character, like as a manager or an entrepreneur?
You bet. I mean, you model it. We all model character. You know, some model it well and some model it poorly. You know, character is just who you are. What kind of a character am I? You know, and so you teach it by modeling. And you know, again, that's where you all exercise a level of influence. If you have a roommate at school, then you exercise a level of influence. And that influence is either a positive influence on you or it's a negative influence on you. And conversely, whatever you're modeling is going to be your heritage. You know, that's going to be your influence.
Victor?
My question is, in terms of growth, which one, as a manager, as an entrepreneur, which one do you grow the company better with, as a manager or as an entrepreneur? Like from your experience with the companies you've worked with as a manager and as an entrepreneur.
Well, that's it's an interesting question because growth can sometimes be good and sometimes growth can be bad. Because you see companies that grow too fast, you know, that don't have the infrastructure to handle it, you know, that can become their downfall. And so, you know, again, I just think, you know, from what I've seen, no one ever is effective in isolation. So when I look at companies that are led well, they're led well by a team of folks that consists of visionaries, folks that are more entrepreneurial, and folks that are all managerial. It takes that group of people for that company to be successful. To me, it's like, I like the analogy of a football team. Okay, so let's think of the quarterback as the entrepreneur and the CEO. Okay, if he does not have an excellent offensive line, he's not going to be successful. He may be Matthew Stafford, if you guys know who that is. He was a quarterback at our high school when our son played high school football. You know, so we watched him play as a kid growing up. And but Matthew Stafford, if he does not have a great offensive line blocking for him, he's just not going to complete very many passes. And so successful teams do well because they're a successful team. Successful quarterbacks do well because they have a great team in place of guys blocking and receivers and kickoff return guys, specialty teams. And so that, to me, it's the same with a company. And so you've got to have, and so if I'm a quarterback, one of the things Roger Staubach used to always do in Dallas is he would always, buy his offensive linemen all kinds of stuff. He'd take them to dinner, he'd buy them new watches. He was always celebrating them because without those guys, he's a nobody. He's not successful. And so, for companies, the same thing is true. You've got to have a great team in place that's executing. Steve Jobs is, I'm sure he was surrounded. You think about Apple, and there's got to be a ton of people executing managing really well. Those are just not the folks that were elevated. You know, we didn't hear as much about those guys.
Josh?
When it comes to your, I guess more of a personal question on a self-insight type of level, your family, your closest business relationships, if had to choose, would they describe you as an entrepreneur or as a manager? And how, with what terms would they use to describe you as those?
Well, you'll have to ask my wife. So, honey, I think that's a question for you.
I think he's told you very well. What he started out as and what he is now are really two different things. But he's a blend of both of those. So I see both of those skills used every day in everything he does. He still evaluates things. He still sees things, as he said, through a lens that's critical and tends to be a little more pessimistic. But he has entrepreneurial and visionary skills to see opportunity all around him.
Would you like to come up and have us chair and some water? We'd love to.
That's right.
Rock? Is that Brian?
Did your experience in Africa affect the way you run your business as a manager or as an entrepreneur? Your experience in Africa? How did that affect the way you run your business?
How did it affect the way I run my business? That's a great question. I often tell people the reason I spend so much time in Africa is because I'm learning from the Africans. You know, Lucini goes with me when we go over there, and we've developed great friendships. And I think one of the biggest things, again, because I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic, I look at the environment over there that people are leading from and how effective they're doing, how optimistic they are, and I just think they are much better managers and leaders than I am because I've got a lot of things going for me. You know, when I lead, there's just a lot of things in place, infrastructure-wise, that are there to set me up for success. I don't have to worry about. I don't have to concern myself with, you know, with electricity. I don't have to concern myself with clean water. I don't have to concern myself, you know, with certain health aspects. And so just the resiliency, the optimism, the creativity, the work ethic. A lot of these guys will go to these conferences and you know, folks can't take off, you know, 3 and 4 days and just go to a conference and hang out. I can do that. Over there they can't. And so they might get up at 4 in the morning, work until 9 o'clock. We're in a conference all day, interacting, learning, and then when we finish, you know, I go to where I'm staying and I rest and clean up. They're going back and taking care of everything else that has to be done. And so I've just realized, you know, I'm a little bit of a pansy. I say it differently, but you know, I'm just amazed at the work ethic, at the ingenuity. You know, if my car breaks down, okay, I take it, get it fixed. If your car breaks down over there, you got to figure out. Okay, there's probably not a you know, a Chief Auto Parts down on the corner. You got to figure out how you're going to continue to operate your business. We had the privilege of having an African live with us for the last year. He left this last summer. He was in Dallas going to school, and I told Lucina, I learned more from him than I've learned from anybody. Just getting to be around him, you know, getting to learn from him, getting to have, you know, meals with him many times during the week. And so it's, you know, one of the unfortunate things is that a lot of folks don't have an opportunity to spend time over there and to see the value and the great things that are happening in so many of those countries. And even countries that have maybe have poor leadership, you've got tremendous resiliency of the people that are having to operate and lead under, you know, the leadership. They just got sometimes the deck stacked against them, and still it's just incredible the things that they're doing. Many people feel that the great business opportunities, you know, for the next 50 years are all going to be in Africa. And it's because of they have a resource similar to what China, you know, Lucina and I were in China, and what year were we there, honey? It was before
2000.
Okay, and so we went over there, and I was speaking in Guangzhou, which is an industrial part of southern China, and there, you know, the room was full of young people. They all spoke English, very interactive, and I just told Lucina, I said, this country's going to be extremely successful. Look at the resourcefulness of the people, of the initiative, of the work ethic. I said, China's going to be interesting to watch. And so here it is 11 years later, you look at China, and I view Africa the same way. I just think, you know, the opportunity, not to mention the resources as they are able to unleash those. So that's a long answer to your question, but I love spending time over there because I find I just learn so much by getting to be around the people.
One of an entrepreneur's biggest admitted pitfalls would be their missed opportunities through life. And back to that notion of pessimism, can you give us some examples, if any, of maybe some noted missed opportunities you've had through your professional career?
You know, I mean, in the oil and gas business, we've got a bunch of them. And so, I mean, one of them, we identified because we were in the Barnett early, and we were there not because we saw the potential, but because we happened to be in Dallas. Fort Worth was over here. We had a lot of relationships. It was natural for us to be there. And so we learned a lot that a lot of folks didn't know about the drilling and shales because of our experience. And so we had the opportunity to be first movers in the Haynesville, in the Marcellus, and in the Eagle Ford. And in all three of those, we started out with some level of activity, and we just saw that we just felt like the risk reward for us was just too big. And so we look back and we just think, you know, people have made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that were in the position we were. And, you know, those were missed opportunities. But we look back and say, you know what, we probably wouldn't evaluate those any different. And so I think what you have to do is just, that doesn't mean you need to do, missed opportunities doesn't mean you need to do something different. Just recognize why you missed it. And if the reasons that you missed it are good reasons, then it's okay. You know, a lot of the reasons that companies are successful have nothing to do with them. If we had, you know, the Barnett Shale could have been just a disaster for us. Why was it a success? Well, because natural gas went from $3 to $13, and, you know, simul-frac with water technology that got developed just happened to work really well. And we just happened to be in the honey hole, in the sweet spot. We were right under the city of Fort Worth. There was a picture in the wall in the New York Times of a drilling rig in downtown Fort Worth, and that was our drilling rig. We just happened to be in the right spot. Nobody else wanted to be there. And we had a relationship with the city. You know, we were able to work in a way that allowed us to drill under the city because of a lot of things that we did and who we were and what we represented. We did what we said we were going to do. And so we look back and say, if we think that that opportunity worked out so well just because we're so smart, you know, then we need to be careful, because in all probability, that smartness, you know, can get your tail in a crack. You just do the right thing, and it may work out, it may not.
Yes.
What would you say is the biggest kind of, or what you found the hardest transitioning from a manager to an entrepreneur, or what you've seen other people transition and like the biggest misconception is about it?
Yeah, the hardest part for me is just the resiliency. You know, I have a tendency, again, as Lucina said, I'm a natural pessimist. We take a lot of risk, and but I've got a melancholy personality, if you know what that is, and so I can get discouraged, I can get down. Things can not go well, and I can just kind of get, you know, I always say I get my dauber down. You know, I just kind of get down. And so if I get down, people around me are going to get down, and they're going to get discouraged, and you know, and so that's the hardest part for me. Is I always say I have to remind myself of what is true. Okay, and so you know, which is I just got to regain perspective. And again, that's where Africa has helped me greatly, because I just think, you got to be kidding! I'm feeling sorry for myself, you know, and so this happened, and. But look at what all I have. You know, look at, and when I say all I have, I'm not talking about money and possessions. I'm talking about, you know, where value really is. And so And again, the fact that we do not borrow money, that's always going to protect us. We're not going to lose money that we can't pay back because we don't borrow money. And so those are missed opportunities, but again, I have to recognize that it's not up to me to create. We can just do what we can. You drill dry holes. You know, in the exploration business, 85% of the wells that you drill are dry holes. You know, you spend a lot of money and then you pour cement down that hole, and there's no salvage value. You got to pay money to, you know, extricate yourself. And so the ones that work, they work well. And so you look back and you say, you know what, I'd drill that dry hole again. You look at the geology, you know, it was a good risk reward. There was potential there, but the natural gas just wasn't there, or it wasn't trapped. And so that's okay, it was a good prospect.
Yes, Ron.
I have read some author there, like Robert T. Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, like, people are born with some kind of mindset. Like, Rich Dad is born with business mindset or entrepreneurial mindset, and Poor Dad is born with like employee mindset or managerial mindset. But you are changed with manager to entrepreneur. Would you share some aha moments when you change yourself from manager to entrepreneur?
So the question is, what facilitated the change, or?
Yeah, like what facilitated the change, and what did you feel like that's the aha moments, and when you switched from manager to entrepreneur?
Yeah, and I think of it as, you know, like my wife said, I think most people, I'll always be a hybrid, you know, and I think that's what a lot of people are, is they're somewhat of a, you know, they have a little bit of both. And so, again, I think it's just being a learner, you know, always recognizing I'm always going to be learning things, and so I want to be reading, I want to be understanding, I want to be asking good open questions. And so, because that's how I'm going to grow and develop professionally. It's how I'm going to grow and develop as a person, by just being open to change. You know, change is, again, change is hard. And I think one of the things that, especially you all getting out of school, things just continue to accelerate, the rate of change does. And so just being open, recognizing that change is going to be a constant. My dad worked for the same company for, how long, honey, 40 years? You know, worked for Schlumberger, which is a company in the oil and gas business. And, you know, in all probability, you all are going to do a number of different things, just like I have. And so it's adapting, it's adjusting, it's being open to change, it's always being a learner, you know. And so I think that just allows you to develop in a number of different realms.
And I have one more question, please. I'm wondering that you have always related things with Africa, with Burundi, Bujumbura, and I'm wondering, when you change yourself to entrepreneur, then you change your view to look people, how people treat, or look how people are working together, or how people are ethical in Africa. Or when you work with your African people, then you change mind here. What do you think? First year or first year?
Which came first?
Yeah.
Did you change about how you felt about people because you were in Africa and saw that and then came back here, or was it here first and then you went to Africa?
No, it's here first, you know.
Is that right, Ron? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I think you develop a mindset, but when you go to other countries, you know, it's one thing to talk about Africans when you don't know any Africans and you've never been to the country, you know, and it's just like you all may have you know, an impression of people from, you know, from New York City. I know I did, you know. But okay, I've gotten to work, or Boston, for example. Lucina and I have some close friends in Boston, and there was a stereotype that you might have until I get to be partners with those people and work with those people and have friendships and develop. And so, again, it all gets back to what I mentioned earlier of valuing people. There are great people all over the world. Now, you know, the shortcoming I have is I don't know people all over the world, but as I get to know them, you know, again, you get to value them, you get to appreciate them, you get to learn from them.
Back and then.
When you look back, what is the one thing that you would do differently
What is the one thing I would do differently? In what realm? I'd marry the same girl, you know. Trying to think of what. Well, I've made plenty of mistakes, okay, and so I can tell you some of those stories. Again, you know, the things that you do that you learn from. I think one of the most painful lessons that I have in 1994. Okay, I'll tell you this story on myself. The natural gas contract came on the NYMEX in '91, and so we had a gas pipeline company that we operated out of Houston. That was part of my responsibility also, and so I'd fly to Houston every week and work with those people, and I was managing risk, and so we started hedging on the NYMEX with a natural gas contract because we were buying natural gas at a fixed price and we were selling it to companies at floating prices, so we were trying to lock our margin in, you know, just hedging 101. And so as we started to trade, we realized that there were a limited number of companies trading natural gas. And that because we were in the business, we had a unique position to speculate in natural gas futures. And so my partner, being very entrepreneurial, just said, hey, there's an opportunity. Let's call a spade and let's take some funds over here and let's trade natural gas on a speculative basis. And so we started doing that. And so the first year we took, $50,000 and traded speculatively and made a couple of $1 million. And it was like, wow, this is really neat. And so, again, we were a entrepreneurial company. And so my partner said, and by the way, why don't you not only do this for the company, but let's set up an account for me and use my money and for you. We're a private company. There's no conflict of interest or anything like that. So I was trading for me and Lucina, I was trading for him, and he had a whole lot more money than I did. And I was trading for the company. And so in '94, we got in a trade. I felt like I was really good, I was really smart, I was experienced. I had an intuition that allowed us to be successful. And you spell that P-R-I-D-E. And so we were going along, and coming into the winter of '94, I put some positions on that really looked like it was going to position us well. And so we got into December, and those positions started going against us. And so I knew that I was right, and it was just a matter of time until the market proved that out. Okay, and so you can be right as long as you have enough money to prove that you're right. And so in really a short period of time, and it was right around Christmas, wasn't it, honey? It was horrible. And we had just bought a lot to build a house. I was trading for my partner. He had an account, and a $3 million account. I was trading it for him personally, plus the company money. And so in the matter of a short period of time, basically, we got margin calls we couldn't meet, and I had to liquidate all of our positions. And so I came home on a Friday. I was devastated. I was convinced I was going to get fired, that he would, that our partnership was over. I'd lost most of our money, and I'd lost the company's money. And so I just shut down. And I came home and I went to bed. I know you remember this, honey, and I just thought, okay, I got to deal with this. It's not going to go away. And so I called him and I said, hey, some things have happened and you need to be aware of it. And so I got out of bed, went back downtown, and I sat down with him. And again, he's 30 years older than me. At the time, how old was I, honey? 94. I've been out of school 13 years, so
30.
We got kids, and I came home and I was crying. My son, who was 4 or 5 years old, said, Daddy, what's wrong? And I said, I just lost a lot of money. And he said, that's okay, I'll help you find it. Like, we'll do this together. So anyway, I went down to my partner, and I just, I sit down and start telling him, and I just start crying. And I'm thinking, oh my, it's awful. And so he just lets me finish all that. He looks at me and he said, you know, I don't know why you're getting so upset with all of this. It's only money. He said, you got your health, you got your wife, you got your kids. We didn't borrow money. You lost money that was ours. And by the way, you're going to figure out how to make that money back. You know, and it was kind of his way of saying, I'm going to stick with you. But he said, there's great lessons to learn here. And you got to learn there's more to life than money. You've lost a lot of money. And you're going to figure, we're going to get our money's worth. That's where I get that term, for this experience that you've just had. And so, we're going to figure this out. And so, what would I do different? I would have never put those positions on. That's an invaluable lesson. I mean, I look back and I just think, man, I'm so thankful that it happened when I was in my 30s, not when I was in my 50s, where I've had the benefit of that last 20 years. That's informed a lot of things that I've done. And so I've got a number of, most everything I've learned by doing it the wrong way, but isn't that true with a lot of us? Experience is a great teacher. And so our responsibility is to learn from it and do it different. If you just keep doing the same thing, don't be surprised if you continue to get the same results.
Yes, and then Jasmine first, and then we'll go back.
From your experiences overseas, especially working in Africa, and you mentioned you went to China, do you see the rest of the world, apart from the United States, as embracing more the managerial mindset or the entrepreneurial mindset, or maybe a mixture of both?
Well, it's definitely both. I mean, one of the great aspects of our country, being in theory, a capitalistic society, is it is the opportunity for folks to come up with ideas, to invent, ingenuity. We've got a business environment that is not an inhibitor, but an encourager, for folks to be able to accomplish things. And so, there's always the delicate balance of regulation, with protecting folks, but also allowing the creativity for new companies to start. And there's no question, with time, that just becomes harder and harder. Because as a society develops, government's in a position to protect the people, and so sometimes that protection is going to feel oppressive with folks that are trying to be entrepreneurial, and the barriers to entry get higher and higher. So it's harder to start a business for you guys than it was for us. I mean, that's true in the oil and gas business. With the Chesapeakes and the Devons of the world out there and the opportunities out there right now, for an independent guy to start an oil and gas company, it's a whole nother world than it was. The opportunities are different. They're just a whole lot bigger, so you got to play with a whole lot larger capital. And so from that standpoint, emerging markets, I know, there's some guys spending a lot of time in Mongolia right now. Mongolia is the emerging opportunity. They've got tremendous resources. They've got a relatively favorable business environment that's being developed. There's some infrastructure being built. They just happen to be between Russia and China, and so there's market there. And so there's a lot. Again, Africa is a country where, as they continue to figure out, the balance of protecting people, but also encouraging investment in business. So there's a lot of fun stuff happening in other parts of the world. But I think we still are we are a country of entrepreneurs. And I think our schools, just see also the entrepreneurial school. When I was in school, we didn't have anything like this. I would have been where you guys are now. I would have loved this. This would have accelerated me. Wouldn't you say that, honey? I had all accounting and finance. I joke because I got a minor in marketing, and so that was the creative bent that I got. But I would have loved to have an entrepreneurial education and hear people talk, because I just didn't know. All I knew was debits and credits and accounting, and so as a result, I did have to learn a lot of stuff the hard way, where this would have really accelerated and advanced that process for me.
Yes.
Do you see more value in someone with a managerial mindset or an entrepreneurial mindset?
Yes. I mean, but both. It just, you know, it kind of depends. They both add value. You know, it's kind of like, again, you know, do I think it's better to have Desmond Bryant as a receiver, or you know, whoever the quarterback? I think Gundy and other guys. But you know, you got to have or the lineman. You know, you just got to have. Depends on what do you need right now. And so, from a value standpoint, that I would value them the same. You know, I've got it's interesting. My partner is, I think, one of the most creative, visionary guys that I know. And he's a lawyer. You know, and so it's funny because here we are, a lawyer and an accountant, you know, as entrepreneurs. But I mean, he's extremely just creative. And I think a lot of that is because he does a lot of reading and you know, he's always learning. He's learned to manage risk and recognize, mitigate risk. And so, you know, that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but it all depends. But you need both. You've got to have both. And so if you know, don't hear me say anything else, hear me say that they're critical.
Victor?
Yes, I think this is linked to one of the questions that have been asked, but I wanted to find out, especially with the difference between managers and entrepreneurs in the African context and the U.S. context. Do you see any major differences? And what would you suggest as young people to really focus on, whether the managerial side or the entrepreneurial side?
You know, I really, okay, again, you know what my bent is, you know, having more of a managerial background. As an entrepreneur, it's just invaluable, okay? For me, I think having that background has just been very, very helpful. And so, you know, somebody that has the other bent would, you know, might say the opposite of that. But if that makes sense. I'm just coming at it from my own perspective. But yeah, you know, I love, again, when you're, I would say, if you're in another country, like one of the African countries, the level of resiliency and optimism that you have to have is so much greater than it is here, because there are a lot of, you know, there's probably a lot more working against you. There's just a lot more natural headwinds, where we have a lot of natural tailwinds that help us succeed, you know, again, because of our culture, the environment that our government, in theory, is trying to promote and facilitate. And so I do think it's a whole lot more difficult. Case in point, we helped an entrepreneur start a business. You think it's okay to give this example, honey? We helped an entrepreneur start a business in Liberia this last year. And so, you know, Liberia is a country that's come out of civil war. They tore up the roads, the power plants, the water, everything. And so they've got a president now who, they're in the midst of re-elections right now. She's Harvard educated. The U.S. is doing a lot to help Liberia rebuild, and she is a great leader. She's gone in and terminated a lot of her upper level folks because of corruption. I mean, she's cleaning house. There's a lot of great things happening in Liberia. And so this friend of ours, who we helped start a business, a trucking business. And so the United Nations is there, and they need contractors, and they want to use indigenous contractors. They want to use local people, because when you do that, they employ other people, and you know, again, that's how things work, rather than having an American company go over there and take jobs. And so we helped him buy a couple of dump trucks in the U.S., get them to Florida, get them shipped, you know, go through customs on the other side, and then put those trucks into, and the hurdles that we had to clear. I mean, if it wasn't for us being on this side and me having conversations with people, you know, doing everything I could to help on this end, and then he had some folks that had worked for the UN, again, that were Liberian, that were helping on the other side. There were just so many barriers to getting that business started. Things are going really well, now with that business, and it's great to see it flourish. And you know, as you continue, then in theory you buy more trucks, and you know, that's how capitalism works. You know, that's how an entrepreneur grows his business, because then you got to have folks managing that business, you got to have folks managing the operations, and it's being expanded. So it's going to be exciting to see. But I just look back, and if it were not for the relationship with us, there were things we were able to do to help him that would have been very, very difficult, if not impossible, for him to do, you know, without having friendships with folks that had leverage, you know, that could accomplish that.
Any more questions before we ask our team to come up and tell us what we've learned? Okay.
That it?
No, they're going to come up and
okay.
tell us what we've
Okay.
learned.
One, you're a wonderful speaker. That's great. I'll do my part in a year. Okay, first, have a strong character. It will get you far. Remember to be who you are. And be open and honest. Admit your faults. If you have a Des moment, learn from your mistakes and grow. Keep your word and consistency. Builds relationships. This is probably the key to your success, and I loved it, was he has a true respect and love for his wife, as we saw. Include your managers. Ask their opinions and ideas. They catch your vision. Give them your entrepreneurial perspective, the big picture. Learn, learn, learn. No matter if you come from an entrepreneur to a manager or manager to an entrepreneur, learn where you are ill-equipped. Become a hybrid.
Surround yourself with people that can help you avoid risk. Have that strong team that can complement your weaknesses. It's the same, you need both the managers and the entrepreneurs like you see in a football team. It's not just the quarterback who's doing it, it's the coaches, it's the offensive linemen. To be a successful manager, you should equip yourselves in all areas of the businesses. You know, don't get stuck behind a desk all day. Go out and get in the field. Work from the janitor all the way from the cook to the sales team. For entrepreneurs and managers to work together, you need similar ethics and moral values. And lastly, having value from your managers and in your entrepreneurship is good, but sometimes it just depends on what you need at that moment. So yes, they both complement each other, but sometimes just think about, what do I need at this moment?
Great.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, help me thank our wonderful guests.